Okay, I want to show you guys something up close, because where I was on the other videos, maybe you can't see this as clearly as I want you to understand it. So, to find the grip that Murray and Richard teaches, the simplest way is to shake your hand out, let it relax. You notice your fingers have a little space between them when you relax. I want you to close up the space, just gently let your fingers touch each other. I'm not clamping them together, they're just gently touching. Now, if you relax your wrist and let those fingers hang loosely, you'll find when you move your wrist up, it closes your four fingers. They follow the wrist and they close up. You see that? Now, I'm exaggerating right now because I don't bring the hand back like that to hold the stick. You want your wrist to be flat right here across the hinge, the radius and ulna to the hand. You want that to be a flat spot. And if you notice when you do that, the camera doesn't quite catch it, but it'll look like the knuckles are moving down slightly from the wrist, but the hinge is flat. And if you shake your hand out like I just demonstrated and bring your wrist up to where it's flat, turn your fingers over, you'll notice they bend from the knuckles. Each knuckle closes a little as you bring your wrist up. So if you bring your wrist up to where it's flat and turn your hand over, that's pretty close to what you need for the grip. The problem is that this index finger has a job to do with the thumb. So it has to learn to be independent of these three fingers because it's holding the stick. You also have to be able to bend this knuckle to come towards the stick to get a grip. So here's the grip, and if you notice my knuckle is bent, and that allows the finger, excuse me, can't see the camera all the time, that allows that index finger to be opposite the thumb. You don't want to just lay it on top of the stick because then it's not holding anything. Does that make sense to you guys? You see it? See how the fingers are together? And if you notice, I do one other thing here, which is the wrist. Your wrist is attached straight like so, and if you hold the wrist in its natural position, you notice you end up with the arm going one way and the stick going the other. So there's a little adjustment you make here. You turn the wrist out to the side, and now if you look at the line, you can see the line of my stick lines up with my forearm. The other thing that does is it puts that crack in the middle finger in a straight line under the stick. When you go over here, it kind of feels like the stick is here on the side of the finger instead of on the actual arch of that crack where you want it to rock. So that's why you turn the wrist out slightly to the side. Notice it makes a straight line. And that is important for force. When you start throwing the weight down and making a throwing motion, you want that stick to travel in a straight line, because if you got it like this and you start throwing, it's going to hit and skip off to the side a little, and you end up with sort of a circular scooping motion going on instead of the force just coming down into the drum. Now, the other issue people seem to be having is, well, how do you play rebounds even? Well, if you listen, if you just surrender the stick to that fulcrum, which is what a fulcrum is, it's a pivoting point, you'll notice 4 notes in a row that all sound the same volume. So if you hold the stick in a playing position and raise the wrist up, you can get even rebounds if you let the weight of the stick fall to the floor. And the floor is where that middle finger is under the stick, 1 inch above the drum. I can get 3, 4, or 2 even bounces. Now, people seem to think, oh, well, the first note of the rebound always sounds louder than the second one. The reason for that is you're driving the stick down into the drum, and if you add any thrust is the true word. If you add some thrust on the way down into the drum, well, yeah, your first note's going to be louder than the second. But if you just allow the weight to fall down. If you turn it high and just turn your wrist and come back to the floor, the notes sound the same. It's just gravity. If you're thrusting into the drum, you're not allowing gravity to bring you down. And all I can say to you is, that's the way a lot of drummers play. That's the old marching way of turning the wrist and hitting the drum hard, because marching drummers played on calfskin heads, which are dead half the time, and that's the way to play on them. But I play on a snare drum with a modern plastic head. It gives me plenty of rebound at almost any tuning. You can tune the heads pretty loose, and if you don't thrust into the head, you will get even rebounds. So, if you're having that issue of the first note being louder than the second when you rebound, you're adding thrust instead of just allowing the mass of your hand and the mass of the stick to come down with gravity. And the only explanation I can give you that maybe you'll understand or that'll help you is, if you're out walking and you want to cross a stream and there's boulders, when you step or hop to each boulder, you don't thrust yourself down onto the rock. You just lift yourself up and gravity pulls you down to that other spot. You kind of take a step. When you walk, you just pick your feet up. You don't drive them into the earth. And especially when you go faster, you don't drive your feet down. They come down faster in relation to how fast you go up. That's a law of motion on Earth. You cannot escape gravity. Gravity pulls you down as fast as you go up. So if you go up really slow and then force down to get your speed, you're actually working against gravity. And there's a lot of drummers out there that say, oh, well, you just let the natural rebound of the stick go up like that. Well, that is sort of correct, but it's a misinterpretation of things. Yes, if an object is moving in one direction and it hits something, it moves back in the opposite direction at the same speed, right? That's one of the laws of motion, or what you can observe of things, how they move. So, but that brings you back to the marching way, where people are holding the stick up in the sky and they're saying full strokes and they're slamming the stick down and then letting it fly back. Well, my feet don't do that when I walk on Earth. So it's not that you can't do that on a drum, but it's not the most efficient way for your body to move. And if you take advantage of gravity as your partner, well, however fast of a person as you are, the stick will come down as fast as you lift it up. And you just have to learn to relax after you lift to whatever apex you're going. You go for a full 45-degree smack, or you're just making little turns. However high you raise it, it will come down. And the other advantages of this is your dynamics will become based on how fast and high you lift the stick. So if I lift the stick a teeny bit, it's soft. The higher I lift it and the faster I go, the harder it starts to hit. It gives me a dynamic control of the notes. When you thrust down, like a lot of drummers say you should do, the problem is when you go faster, you're going to shove down harder to go faster, and that always creates an accent because you're adding force going down. So it becomes an unintentional accent, or you lose control of the dynamics. If you teach your body to only play fast, hard, well, you won't be able to play fast and soft. And when I'm sitting next to an acoustic bass player playing a gig, you can't be slamming like that into the drum because you're going to bury every note the guy's playing. Even on an electric bass, he'll just go over and turn the amp up till he can hear himself, and now you have to play louder. So don't get in that fight about dynamics. Learn to control your dynamics so you can play with anybody. Loud, soft, it doesn't matter. I always laugh at drummers I see inside of glass cages playing with the orchestra. If you're in a glass cage, you aren't listening to the people around you playing. You're not making music. You're listening to yourself through earplugs probably, and matching your timing to them and letting the sound engineer control everything. You're not in control of the music anymore. You're losing part of what a drummer is supposed to be doing, which is guiding the band, playing time and balancing yourself and your playing with the dynamics and volume they're playing at. You have to make music with the people you're playing with, not play so loud that you can't hear them and you ignore them and you just keep a beat and hope everybody follows you. That's not really making music. It goes on out there in the world of music, don't get me wrong, but that isn't a very musical way to approach things. Okay, so I hope that helps you understand what the fulcrum point is for. If you have an established fulcrum, things are even. Just I'll pick the stick up and let it come down with gravity. The same way you walk or run. And if you get onto that feeling, that's what the floor is for. What Murray and Richard call the floor. That resting point where the stick comes to a point of rest in your hand. And in this position, you can relax your arm. You can't see me right now in the video because I'm too close, but the object is to relax the whole arm and shoulder at your side and barely have any tension in your arm, just enough to raise your hand up to a 45-degree angle here. It is the same thing that classical pianists do. They don't tense up their arms and shove into the piano. They use their wrists and their fingers. And they push the key down into the key bed, and that makes a lever inside of the piano go up and down and hit the key, hit the string. And that's the same motion you want in your hand. It's like a hammer. You pull it up and you allow it to come down. And you can guide the hammer to the nail head. That's the problem with holding the stick up in the sky and slamming it down and going back. You're not going to hit the same place. Well, if you want the same sound consistently from your drum, backbeat after backbeat, that's part of what a floor gives you. You learn to return the stick to the exact same spot. It gives you control of your sound. You can go right to the bell of a cymbal or right to the center of a tom-tom, and you know where that is. But if you're out here in the sky throwing the stick at the drum and letting it fly back, well, that's like dribbling a basketball. And try dribbling a basketball around your toms. It isn't going to work. The drum heads, it just isn't efficient. If you watch all the great drummers, when they move around the drum, you'll see the image of the stick at each drum as they move. They're not holding the stick in the sky, they're allowing it to come down. Okay, enough about all that. I hope that gives you guys a little more insight into what this is about. But an established fulcrum is what you're going for in the first crack of the middle finger. Then you only have to move once for all those notes. Don't pull with my fingers. I don't slam the stick down, let it fly back, and then yank it back down with my finger to make two notes. That requires you to move twice. You're moving for that note, you're moving for that note. Well, I move once, and I get two notes. I can get up to 4 notes. I can actually get up to 5, but the 5th one's a little softer, because the notes decay as you allow the stick to move over the fulcrum. It wants to come to rest. That's what the fulcrum is for. Okay, I hope that helps give you guys a little more insight. It's a little closer up. Maybe you can see what I'm talking about better. But you have to find that grip, that natural position for your hand. Just bring your wrist up, allow your fingers to curve. There's the 3 fingers that create the fulcrum. The first finger, you put the stick in the first crack here on the side of the stick, and you put the flat of your thumb opposite that crack, and you hold the stick. Now, Murray and Richard would start everybody off. They'd say, keep your back fingers off the stick and curl them next to each other like that. And once you get the weight really learning to sit in there and it doesn't come out, your natural sense of touch will tell you when to, gee, I'm playing louder and I need a little assistance from the tip of the 4th finger. I'll try to get it in the camera for you guys. Then when I get louder, I find I need to come over to the crack of the middle finger and the tip of the 5th finger. ends up on the stick. And at the loudest volume, now I'm talking about slamming over your head, which you really don't have to do. But, you know, if you want to be a little bit more of a showman and throw your sticks way up high in the sky, you may need to have all three cracks of the stick, all three fingers, middle cracks on the stick. But you can't learn that, and it won't happen in your hand correctly till you establish that fulcrum and you get these first three fingers controlling things. It's not that you don't use the back fingers. That's a misconception a lot of students got from Murray and Richard because they only took a couple lessons and then they stopped. Well, they never got to the point where they were using their back fingers. That's all. So there's a misconception out there that it's a three-fingered grip. Well, it is for about 70% of playing, because about 70% of what you do, you'll realize you don't really need the back fingers. It's only when you get to a certain volume that you'll feel like you need to hold on more. And that's your natural sense of touch. The velocity of the stick hitting the drum head will guide your sense of touch, and these three fingers all work together at a certain point. But I always have the weight in the middle finger. If you grab too tight with these back fingers, you will lift the stick away from your first three fingers. And, you know, I know it's popular. People say they hold back there and go like that. Well, yeah, you can make a fulcrum back there if you want out of those back two fingers, but it's not as efficient as your stronger middle finger. Your pinky and fourth finger aren't that strong. In fact, if you notice, the piano players all have a difficulty moving their fourth finger independently of the other ones. It's just kind of the nature of your hand. So the middle finger is much more oriented to all this than the back fingers. But you can do anything with your hands and play the drums any way you want. I know guys that have no idea about technique. They just grab the drumstick and they hit, but they understand. They naturally feel gravity coming down and turning their wrists. Well, I got to be honest with you, 90% of modern drumming is single strokes. And those drummers have careers. They're professional drummers. They have no idea about technique, but they have a good feel when they play music. They're making music, and that's what all this is for. You know, technique won't make you a musician. It'll only make it easier to interact and play what you want to play on your instrument. That's why you want to develop your technique. It gives you more vocabulary than just clutching the stick and playing single strokes. Does that make sense? Hope you understand what I'm saying. Enough about this right now. Now I'm going to go on to some other things that I feel are important. The next thing I want to discuss today is how to develop your sense of time, because that is our main job. We're timekeepers when we play with other people. The most basic way that everyone needs to start with at the beginning is to turn on a metronome and learn to count note values. Everything from a quarter note up to a 30-second note, you should be able to count and learn to play with the metronome. So basically what I'm saying is use your feet as a metronome and learn to time them along with the metronome when you're practicing. Your feet give you a certain foundation, okay? Of course, we all got to learn to play quarter notes and eighth notes and triplets and 16th notes and quintuplets and groups of 6 or 16th triplets, groups of 7 and 32nd notes. So you're going from 1 to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 notes between the beats. That's where you start. Those are the note values you're going to encounter in music when you go out and play with people. Now, a lot of people ignore 5 and 7 and they just learn to play triplets. But quintuplets and septuplets are speeds in between 6 and 8, and those are things we play a lot in music. But 5 and 7, I'll be honest with you, they're not in a lot of the music we play, but that's not a reason why you can't learn to play it and use it. It's part of the vocabulary of rhythm. If you learn to hear it and execute it, you can use them. They're just as valuable as any other note. Tuplets, as they're called. Triplets, 5, quintuplets, or septuplets. Okay, they're valuable at the speeds that are in the cracks in between the speeds we always use. Well, what value is that? People ask sometimes, well, why would I do that? Nobody uses those. Well, drummers like to talk about laying back on the beat. Okay, they like to lay the backbeat a little behind the time. Well, there's a line in terms of note values. When you slow down, or excuse me, when you go from 16th notes up faster to groups of 5, or when you're playing 16th notes and you slow down to triplets, there's a line between that 4 16th notes and those 3 triplets. In other words, if you're playing evenly 4 16th notes and you want to lay back the time a little bit, there is a point where if you slow down behind the beat too much, you transition to the next speed. If you never practice 5 and 7, you don't know where that line is between 16th triplets and 32nd notes, and you don't really know where the line is between 16th triplets and 16th notes. You may be able to guess successfully playing with a band, but the difference between rushing and dragging is that invisible line. If you want to lay back on the beat or go up on the edge of the beat, which adds a little excitement, you have to know where the line is, because if you cross it, you've gone into the next speed. But you can go right up to the edge of it. It's a few milliseconds different, but that's what learning to, why you play all those values and your brain learns to hear those little changes in speed between the note values. And that makes your time better. When you can perceive where everything is, your time feel gets better. You know exactly where everything is. Now, the other way, obviously, to get your time better is to play with other people, because that's another whole issue. When you play with other people and there's no metronome going on, there's no click track in your ears, you're just playing with other humans, you have to know where the time is. Your job is to lead the band and maintain the time. So if you have a tendency to rush or drag, you have to know that. You have to learn, do you rush when you play with people? Do you drag? The biggest problem I find with most beginning drummers is you're listening to everybody, you're trying to accompany the music you're hearing and create the time, but if you got somebody in the band that's doing coke, or you got somebody on the other side of the stage that's drinking heavily, well, you got one guy that's going to rush and another guy that's going to want to slow down. And if you're following the music and one guy's rushing or one guy, you're still trying to accompany them, and they can lead you around and you can end up speeding up or slowing down because you're trying to accompany the music you're hearing and you don't really know where the time is in your own nervous system. Now that's what comes from practicing with a metronome and counting out loud. That is an incredible, important part of this. You don't practice in silence, counting in your mind. This is music. Use your ears. Sing the speed with your voice by counting, and your ears and brain will memorize what each one of those things sound like. And then you get it into your unconscious, into your nervous system, and you have a sense of internal timing. And now you won't be dragged around by somebody that's high, speeding up or slowing down. You will perceive, whoa, that guy's rushing, and you will know how to stay where you are, and he'll finally listen to you, and hopefully you're playing with good musicians and they come back to you. They're not that high or fucked up that they're going to mess up the music. But I've experienced that with people. Guys that are going out and smoking crack, and then they come back into the bandstand after a break and they're like so wound up they take off like a rocket ship. And they drag the whole band around. If you aren't conscious of the time and can't keep it and realize that guy's rushing, or that guy's really drunk and he's about to fall asleep, he's going to slow down. That's all part of working as a professional musician. You don't always get to play with really good professional guys with good attitudes. There's a lot of things going on socially and chemically in the music business, so be aware of it, okay? So playing with other people is very, very important. That's the ultimate goal, is to make music, but your job is being the timekeeper. So I want to go on now to one little other thing. That this is something that Richard Wilson taught me, and I found it quite a challenge. How do I describe this? This can be done with single strokes, but I'm going to demonstrate it with paradiddles because it's a little more complicated, and you'll find with paradiddles it's hard to do. With single strokes, this is a little easier to do, and if you find the paradiddles too confusing for the mind and body to do this way, then I would say start with single strokes. Here's what I'm talking about. If you play paradiddles, everybody I hear knows the first position of a paradiddle. I hear lots of drummers play them fast as lightning. They play them all over the drums. Paradiddles, we all know what they are, but there are 3 other paradiddles besides the first one, and those are called inversions. Now, how do you learn them and learn to hear them in the phrase of time? Well, the idea is that a paradiddle is 4 notes, starting with that accent, but there's 4 16th notes to every beat, and there's no reason why you can't start the paradiddle on the 2nd division, or on the 3rd division of 16th notes, or on the 4th division of time. And learning to do that and still play the rudiment and hear it where it's shifting against the time relative to the metronome or your feet, it'll sound like the paradiddle's moving forward in time each time. If you add 1 note, it seems that if you write it down, it's like the paradiddle's going to the right. And if you write it out the other way, if you add different odd amounts, the paradiddle will move backwards or forward relative to the timekeeping. So here's what I'm going to demonstrate is I'm going to play paradiddles, but after I play 2 of them, I'm going to add 1 single stroke. That will shift the paradiddles then, when I start over again, to the next inversion. There's the next inversion. I'm going to add another single. So I'm going to go through this. It's hard to talk and do it at the same time for me. I'm not that coordinated. But anyway, here's the idea. I'm going to go through the 4 inversions of the paradiddle, adding 1 single stroke after 2 paradiddles. So you can hear 2 paradiddles, a single stroke, 2 paradiddles, a single stroke. And I'm going to keep time. It's like a sequence. Play the 2 paradiddles, it shifts over. 2 paradiddles, it shifts over. It'll go the other way against the feet. How do I describe that? When I just did what I just did, 1 and 2 and there's the other added note. That means that added note's on the beat, and now the paradiddle is starting on the 2nd division of 16ths. It's moving over to the right. If you play 3 single strokes instead of 1, it moves the other way. I'll demonstrate that. Make sense? It's a good way to get your inversions going. Now, a lot of people just go paradiddle, 1 inversion, they go to the next one, but that's, you know, is a good thing to do with, you don't add any single strokes, you just learn to move to the 4 inversions. But in the real world, when I'm jamming and playing a drum solo, I'm doing a lot of single strokes and moving around the drums with singles and doubles, and to get those paradiddles in there and their inversions, because when I'm playing singles, I can start that paradiddle on any of those divisions if you hear and perceive where they are. And that's why I suggest you mess around with adding a single stroke or 3 single strokes to the paradiddle as you practice it, because it'll shift you in different ways relative to the time. And that gives you a certain mastery of paradiddles. Once you can hear that, you get a freedom with paradiddles where you can hear them starting anywhere in relation to your feet. Now, what's the value of that? Well, it's music. It gives you 3 other variables that you don't have if you just play paradiddles in their basic position. The other thing is, if you think about this, we play in 4/4 most of the time, and if you play 4 paradiddles in a row, the accent's on the beat all the time. Well, when you see paradiddles in marching music, that's the way they always are. They're in 4/4 and the accent's on the beat. So, me personally, I want to get free of that marching thing. I don't want to sound like all my phrases are like a marching drummer. Because I'm playing jazz, I'm playing blues, I'm playing country. I play all these different styles of music. Now, I don't get to solo in all those styles of music, but in situations where I do, I don't want to sound like a marching drummer when I'm playing jazz and trading fours with people. And that's what those paradiddle inversions give you. Your phrase can start in different places. It won't sound like you're marching and playing paradiddles. It's just a little musical thing, but you listen to great drummers, all the ones we all listen to, you know, Steve Gadd, Vinnie Colaiuta, Tony Williams, you go down the list of drummers in all the styles. They have that freedom in their phrasing. They do unexpected things and you go, whoa, what was that? And it draws your ear in and your attention in. Those are the things when I hear the great drummers play that excite me and catch my ear and my brain goes, wow, what was that they did? How did they do that? Well, they have that freedom in their phrasing. They do. That's why it comes at you unexpectedly, because you're following the beat and they do something suddenly that's right before the beat or right after the beat, and your brain goes, what was that? And you wonder what that thing was that was so cool when they played it. When you do things like that, it creates a certain rhythmic tension, and your audience feels it and hears it, and they react. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Vinny do an odd phrase, and the whole audience hears it and starts screaming in response to what he's playing. That's the excitement of rhythm, and you want to learn to get that freedom in your phrasing so you can play things like that. But if you only play paradiddles in first position, well, you're going to sound like a marching drummer. Now, there's some guys that play them really, really fast, so they can get by with that one position because you get into the excitement of the speed. But if you analyze Steve Gadd's playing, you will discover that the beats that he comes up with really interesting, different ways of playing time. And if you study that stuff a little bit, you'll discover, wow, those things kind of break down into inversions and different paradiddle positions. And he creates interesting beats by exploring those other variables that are available to you besides paradiddle on the beat. So that's why I'm encouraging you to mess around with these things, be creative. So you don't just sound like you're copying somebody else, but you have your own identity when you play. That's half of being a famous drummer, is not sounding like everybody else, but having a good time and having your own element to bring to the music, your own rhythmic statements you can add to what's going on, other than just being the beat keeper. Okay, now, let's go on to the next little piece of this that I find interesting. You can do the same thing with double paradiddles, but I'm going to play double paradiddles as 16 triplets. So there's 6 notes going on. But if you add one single stroke, like I did with the single paradiddle, to the double paradiddle, it shifts it. Now you're dividing time into six. You're feeling time in sixths of the beat, rather than quarter notes where you're dividing the time into 4s. Playing those triplets like that and learning where the time is with your feet as you play them will improve your sense of time and give you a finer sense of the divisions. Now you learn to hear 6 instead of just 4. Now, with that double paradiddle, you can also do the sort of the same thing I did with the paradiddle. In other words, if you add 5 single strokes after 2 double paradiddles, the accent will seem to move backwards in time rather than forward like it does when you do 1. So here's the idea with the double paradiddle adding 5 single strokes in between the double paradiddles. Makes sense? Okay. Now you can do, well, how do I describe this? Another way to practice the double paradiddle and adding single strokes is to add 2 or 4 singles. Now what that does is it keeps the paradiddle, the double paradiddle that you're playing, it makes it a double time version of 8th note triplets. And I find in jazz time, when I add 2 or 4 singles, it moves the accent of the double paradiddle to one of the primary divisions of a regular 8th note triplet. So we all count 8th note triplets, 1 and 2 and And what happens is the triplet starts on the, the paradiddle, double paradiddle, starts on the 1, or it'll start on the and, or it'll start on the It won't be in the cracks between those, like what happens when you add 1 or 5. 1 or 5 moving by that 1/6 of a beat, you got to be real careful playing with other people because they may not be able to hear that or feel that. But if you stay in the realm of 2 or 4, as you shift the double paradiddle around in the time, it will still be synchronized to the triplet divisions of an 8th note triplet, which is sort of the foundation that everyone's doing when they're playing blues or jazz. They're hearing or feeling that triplet, 8th note triplet division, not 16th triplet division. So it's a little safer thing to do when playing with other people. 2 or 4 singles won't throw their sense of time off like it might when you do 1 or 5. It just depends how good the people you're playing with are. If they have a good sense of time themselves, you can do anything you want and they won't get off. They know where the time is. They feel it just like you do. But a lot of people lean on you for the time, and if you do something that's a little off time, they may shift to that thing that's in between the cracks and think that's where the time is, and they want to get back with you, and that'll mess everything up. So that's the danger with doing some of these odd amounts. You have to be in command of them, you have to know where you are, and if you throw somebody else off, you have to perceive that they're off and know where the time really is. Maybe give them a cymbal crash to bring them back on the beat, or play something that's obvious that brings them back into the fold, and they're not out there in space going, where do I play the next note? You got to be careful because your job is to keep time, but the fun is playing with the time. So you got to be careful how much you play with it, where you go with these things. But practicing all those things that I'm talking about gets your sense of time better. You start to feel those 6 positions of time in 16th triplets relative to the quarter note of the time itself. Now, you can also do this with 30-second notes, and it's really hard to do when you start shifting by 1/8 of a beat. It's difficult to hear, it's difficult to keep your feet in time, but if you count out loud as you practice it, you will find out where the feet go. You may need to write it out. Get out a piece of music paper and write out 30-second notes and draw in the paradiddles and the accents and look at what's going on. Write out where the feet are going and look at it and count it and play it until you start to hear it. But it does take a lot of effort. Now, the same thing also with 30-second notes. You can have the same danger with 30-second notes or triple paradiddles. Excuse me, I should have identified the 30-second notes. You're playing a triple paradiddle. Okay, so you can add one 30-second note and it shifts it off going this way. And if you add 7 30-second notes, it shifts it the other way. But the danger again is you're shifting by one 30-second note. And if you're doing that when you're playing with other people, you got to be careful. In a drum solo, when you're not keeping time for anybody, you have the freedom to play all those things, as long as when you get done with your drum solo, you play something obvious in 4/4 to bring everybody back in. But you have that freedom when you're alone on stage, play a solo. You can do any amounts you want. You just have to hear them and know where you are and not throw yourself off. Now, the thing with 30-second notes, that makes them safer than adding 1 or 7 is to add 2 or 4. Well, 2 or 6 are the ones that work better. If you use 2 singles after the triple paradiddle or 6 singles after the triple paradiddle, you will keep the triple paradiddle in synchronization with 1 E, and your triple paradiddle will be like a double time of where the 16th notes are falling. And you won't be in the cracks between the 16ths, which those other 30-second divisions will give you. So that's something you got to be careful of. Something I mentioned at the beginning of the video is that it may be easier to do this with single strokes rather than paradiddles in the beginning, to understand how the time moves relative to the metronome and your feet keeping time. Because when you add in the paradiddles, you got to keep track of the sticking, moving, and it's much easier to get the idea in the beginning with single strokes. So instead of playing paradiddle, paradiddle, and a tap, I'm just going to play 16th notes on the same hand and add that single stroke. So you end up getting something like this. Which is a little easier to do and sort out and keep the feet where they're going. Because when you're adding the diddle and the paradiddle, sometimes your foot's going to be on the diddle, sometimes it's on the second note of the diddle, and that adds another dimension of coordination to the whole exercise, where with single strokes you don't have those positions of the diddle and the foot having to land with the diddle, which makes it easier. So you may want to start with single strokes.